The years rolled on like gentle waves. The seasons changed, and with each one, Maria grew a little older, a little slower, but never smaller. Her garden still bloomed every spring. Her laughter still filled the kitchen. And the world, somehow, still seemed to pause when she smiled. Grace was 12 now, bright, clever, full of questions that made Maria both proud and wistful. She was growing up in a world that was softer than the one her grandmother had endured. Yet Maria knew that kindness must still be taught, protected, and passed on. One golden afternoon, Grace found Maria sitting under the old oak tree, sorting through a box of letters. "What are those, Grandma?" she asked. Maria looked up, her eyes shining behind her glasses. "Memories, my love. Letters from people I once met. Some from those I forgave, some from those who forgave me." Grace sat beside her. "Why keep them all?" "Because," Maria said softly, "they remind me that even pain has a purpose. Every harsh word, every injustice, it all brought me here." Grace frowned, curious. "Were you ever angry? Like really angry at them?" Maria smiled faintly, closing the box. "Once. But anger is like fire, Grace. If you hold it too long, you're the one who burns." The girl nodded slowly, her young mind absorbing every word. A few days later, Maria grew weak. It started with short breaths, then long silences. The doctor said her heart was simply tired. There was no sadness in her, only acceptance, like someone who had finished her part in a much larger story. Lily and Daniel stayed by her bedside, holding her hands. Grace wouldn't leave the room, her little hand clutching her grandmother's wrist, as if she could keep her here by sheer will. Maria smiled gently at her. "My darling girl," she whispered, "don't be afraid. You must live beautifully. Promise me that." Grace's eyes welled. "I promise, Grandma, but who will teach me now?" Maria's fingers brushed the child's cheek. "The world will. And when it's unkind, remember. Be the kind one." Her breath slowed. "Grace, that's why I loved your name. Because that's what saves us all." Her eyes fluttered shut, her lips still curved in peace. At her funeral, people from every corner of the city came. Mothers, daughters, businessmen, teachers, even strangers whose lives she had touched without ever knowing their names. They spoke of her humility, her strength, her unshakable kindness. Mrs. Hartley, now frail but graceful, placed a single white rose on the coffin and whispered, "You were my greatest teacher." Daniel gave a short, trembling eulogy. "My mother never built an empire, but she built something greater, a legacy of compassion that changed every person she met." Lily held Grace close, whispering, "She's not gone, sweetheart. She's just everywhere now." Grace wiped her tears. "Then I'll talk to her every day." Years passed. Grace grew into a woman, strong, kind, and impossibly wise for her age. She took over the Grace Foundation, just as her grandmother once guided its birth. One morning, she stood on a stage before hundreds of people, holding a photo of Maria. She said, voice steady but full of emotion, "My grandmother wasn't rich or famous, but she had something this world forgets, grace. She forgave when others would have fought. She lifted people without asking for credit, and because of that, the world is different." The audience rose to their feet, applauding through tears. Grace smiled, glancing up toward the sky, and whispered, "This is for you, Grandma." Later that evening, Grace walked through her grandmother's old garden, now part of a public park named the Garden of Grace. Children laughed among the flowers. Volunteers planted trees. The same oak still stood tall, strong, eternal. She sat beneath it, running her fingers through the grass, and for a moment, she could almost hear Maria's voice in the wind. "Be kind when no one is watching, my dear. That's when it matters most." Grace closed her eyes and smiled, whispering back, "I will, Grandma, always." The wind carried her words away, soft and infinite, and somewhere, perhaps beyond time itself, Maria Alvarez smiled, knowing her story, her lesson, her grace, would live forever. Years later, long after Maria Alvarez's name had become a quiet legend whispered in classrooms and community halls, the city itself had changed. The skyline was taller, the streets busier, but one thing remained: a sense of warmth that always seemed to ripple outward from a single point: the Garden of Grace. On sunny afternoons, children played among the roses and lilacs that Maria once tended with her bare hands. The air carried laughter, and sometimes, if you stood still enough, you could almost feel her there, like sunlight resting gently on your shoulder. Grace Alvarez, now a woman in her 30s, stood beneath the same oak tree where her grandmother used to sit. She wore a white dress, simple and soft, and her hair moved gently in the wind. In her hands, she held a letter, yellowed at the edges, written in her grandmother's looping handwriting. She unfolded it slowly, her heart heavy and full all at once. "My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, it means I have gone home. Don't grieve too long, my love, because every act of kindness you do will bring me closer than any prayer could. You may grow up in a world that forgets what humility looks like. Don't let it change you. Remember, grace isn't weakness. It's the quiet power that holds the world together. Love everyone. Forgive freely. And when people look down on you, lift your chin, but never your heart. With endless love, Grandma Maria." Grace's lips trembled as she read the final line. She folded the letter and pressed it to her chest, whispering, "I've tried, Grandma. Every day I've tried." She glanced around the garden, now full of people helping others, just as Maria once dreamed. There were students mentoring orphans, women teaching other women to read, old men planting trees beside teenagers with rough pasts. Everywhere there was movement and gentleness, and at the center of it all stood a bronze statue of Maria, smiling softly, her hands open, palms up, as if offering the world another chance. At its base was a single inscription: "Grace is not inherited. It is learned and passed on." Grace smiled through her tears. "You were right," she whispered. "You didn't just change a family, Grandma. You changed the way people treat each other." That evening she returned home, where her own daughter, also named Maria, waited for her on the porch steps. The little girl had her grandmother's calm eyes and her great-grandmother's gentle curiosity. "Mom," she asked, "who was the lady in the statue?" Grace knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "That lady," she said softly, "was someone who believed being kind could change the whole world." The girl's eyes widened. "Did it?" Grace smiled, her gaze turning toward the setting sun. "It did, sweetheart. It still is." Later that night, Grace tucked her daughter into bed. As she turned off the light, the little girl whispered sleepily, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be like her." Grace paused at the doorway, heart swelling. "Then the world will be lucky," she said. And as the moonlight spilled across the room, she could almost feel her grandmother's presence, soft, proud, and eternal. In the quiet of the night, the wind moved through the trees outside, brushing gently against the windows, carrying a whisper that seemed to come from far beyond. Grace never dies. It lives on in every heart it touches, and somewhere, unseen but deeply felt, Maria Alvarez smiled again, watching her legacy live, breathe, and grow through generations that would never know poverty or shame the way she did. Only compassion, patience, and the kind of strength that heals. Years later, when Grace was an old woman herself, the world had grown louder, brighter, faster, colder. Skyscrapers of glass scraped the heavens. Cars hummed silently through streets that no longer smelled of soil and rain, but of steel and ozone. Yet in the center of it all, nestled between two corporate towers, stood the Garden of Grace, still blooming, still alive. It was small now, just half an acre of earth surrounded by silver and concrete. But when people stepped inside, they slowed down. They breathed. They remembered what being human felt like. Grace sat on a wooden bench beneath the same oak tree that had shaded her grandmother, her mother, and her as a child. Her hair was white as frost. Her hands were lined and thin, but they still carried the same softness that Maria once had, the gentleness that could mend broken spirits. A young reporter approached, hesitant but eager. "Mrs. Alvarez," she began, voice trembling. I'm writing a piece about the history of this place. They say your grandmother built it from nothing. Is that true? Grace smiled faintly, eyes half-lidded, as though looking back across lifetimes. She built it from kindness, she said. From forgiveness. From the belief that people could change, the reporter blinked. But didn't people look down on her? For being poor? Grace laughed softly, a sound like wind chimes in the breeze. Oh, they did. They judged her, humiliated her. But she never let bitterness take root. She used every insult as soil for something beautiful. The reporter scribbled furiously, then asked, "And what do you think her greatest lesson was?" Grace looked toward the statue, the one of Maria, smiling eternally under the branches. Her voice was calm, but filled with weight. "That humility is not defeat," she said. "That gentleness is not weakness. That power without compassion is a fire that consumes but love. Love is a flame that warms." The reporter was quiet for a long moment, then asked one final question. If she could see the world now, this busy, divided digital world, what do you think she'd say to us? Grace smiled, closing her eyes as a soft breeze passed through the trees. The day of Grace's memorial arrived beneath a sky painted soft gold and lavender. Hundreds gathered inside the garden. Neighbors, workers, children she once taught, even strangers who'd only heard whispers of the Lady of Grace. The oak tree stood proud, its branches arching like arms protecting everyone below. The air smelled of wet soil, jasmine, and memory. At the front, Maria, Grace's daughter, held the same letter her mother had written. Her hands shook slightly, not from grief alone, but from awe. She looked around at the crowd. They were silent, waiting. Her voice trembled at first. "My mother wasn't a rich woman. She never owned much. No mansion, no diamonds, no luxury cars." She paused, eyes glistening. But she left behind something far more valuable. She left behind kindness. A murmur moved through the crowd, the kind that wasn't sound, but feeling. Maria continued. "When I was little, I used to be embarrassed that we didn't have money. I wanted to hide her simplicity, but now I realize she never needed wealth to be powerful. Her grace was her crown." An elderly man in the crowd wiped his eyes. "She gave me my first job," he whispered. Didn't even ask if I had experience. Just said, "Everyone deserves a beginning." A woman stepped forward, one of the former wealthy daughters-in-law who once judged her. "I used to look down on her," she admitted, her voice cracking. "But when my husband left and my family turned their backs, she was the only one who came. She brought me soup." She said nothing, just sat with me. That day, I realized what love actually looked like. Maria smiled faintly through her tears. "That was her way," she said softly. Quiet, steady, unshakable. She believed you could change a life without raising your voice, just by showing up with an open heart. The crowd fell still again. Children placed flowers at the base of the oak. Old men bowed their heads. Even the wind seemed to hush. Maria unfolded her mother's letter again, reading the last line aloud. "Keep the garden alive, not just here, but in people's hearts." Then she looked up. "That's what I ask of all of you today. Keep it alive." That night, long after everyone had left, Maria stayed behind. The candles flickered around the statue of her grandmother, and beside it stood her mother's bench, now draped in flowers. She sat there, the night air cool against her skin. "Mom," she whispered, "you were right. They remember you. Not because of what you had, but because of who you were." A soft rustle moved through the trees. A single petal drifted down and landed on her lap, the same way it had for Grace all those years ago. Maria laughed softly through her tears. I know. You're still here." She looked up at the stars. They shimmered like tiny lanterns above the garden, each one a memory, glowing, eternal. Months passed. The world outside grew louder again, more impatient, more digital, but the Garden of Grace only grew quieter, more peaceful, more sacred. People came from far and wide, some to pray, some to cry, some to remember, and every time someone entered, they'd read the words engraved in stone at the gate, words Maria had chosen from her mother's final letter, Be kind, even when the world isn't watching. No one left without feeling something shift inside them. Some called it peace, others called it forgiveness. But everyone called it grace. Years later, a little girl with dark curls ran through the garden laughing. She stopped by the oak tree and turned to her mother. "Mommy," she said, pointing to the statue, "who's that lady?" Her mother knelt beside her. "That's your great-grandmother," she said. "She taught this whole town what kindness means." The little girl frowned, curious. "But how can one person teach everyone?" Her mother smiled. "Because she never tried to be powerful. She just tried to be good." The girl thought about that, then smiled too. "Then I want to be good like her." And somewhere, deep in the whisper of the leaves, the wind seemed to answer. Gentle, loving, proud. A few years after the memorial, the Garden of Grace had become more than a sanctuary. It was a living legend. Tourists came with cameras, poets came with notebooks, and lost souls came with questions. But for the people who truly knew the story, the garden wasn't just a place. It was a promise. Maria ran it with devotion, just as her mother and grandmother had before her. Every morning at dawn, she would unlock the gate, sweep the path beneath the oak, and whisper, "Good morning, Mom. Good morning, Grandma." And every morning the wind would stir, as if answering back. One day, a black car stopped outside the gate. From it stepped a man in an expensive suit, his face hidden behind dark glasses. He looked out of place, too sharp, too clean, too corporate for the gentle earth beneath his shoes. Maria greeted him kindly. "Good morning. Welcome to the garden." The man didn't smile. "You're Maria Alvarez, correct? The current owner?" "Yes." He handed her a folded letter, thick paper, embossed seal. "I represent the Property Development Board. The city's expanding this district. Your land is in the proposed blueprint." Maria froze. "You're saying they want to buy it?" "Not buy," he corrected smoothly. "Acquire. You'll be compensated generously." Her heart sank. "You mean destroy it?" He sighed, as if tired of hearing that word. "It's progress, Ms. Alvarez. The world moves forward. We can't hold on to the past forever." Maria's eyes narrowed. Some things aren't the past. Some things are the roots of the future. But he only nodded politely, as if indulging a child. "You have 60 days to decide." Then he turned and left. That night, Maria sat beneath the oak tree with the city lights glowing in the distance. She ran her hands over the old wooden bench, the one her mother used to sit on, the one her grandmother once built. Her chest tightened. "Mom," she whispered, "what do I do now?" The wind moved through the branches. A single flower fell into her lap. She smiled sadly. "Of course," she murmured. "You'd tell me to fight, but with grace." The next day she called a community meeting. People came, old workers, young families, students, reporters. The small garden was packed with hearts ready to defend it. Maria stood on the old stone steps, her mother's words echoing in her mind. She didn't shout. She didn't rage. She simply said, "This place has saved more souls than any skyscraper ever will." Her voice trembled, but it carried. They call it progress to tear down what they don't understand. But we know this garden isn't a piece of land. It's a piece of us. The crowd cheered, loud and passionate. The story spread online. Photos of the Garden of Grace flooded the internet. The oak tree, the statue, the letters, the people. And then one day, the man in the black suit returned. But this time he didn't come alone. Behind him walked the city's mayor and the mayor's mother. The older woman gasped as soon as she entered. "This place," she whispered, tears welling. "I remember it. Your grandmother. She gave me food when my family lost everything." The mayor turned to Maria, eyes softening. "My mother told me stories about this garden. I didn't realize it was the same one." Maria bowed her head slightly. "It's still the same, just older, stronger." The mayor looked around, humbled. "No, it's eternal." Then, turning to the man in the suit, he said, "Remove this property from the development list." The man hesitated. "Sir, the board will respect my decision." When they left, Maria sat back down on the bench and let out a long breath. Her heart felt lighter, not because she'd won, but because the world had remembered. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving petals scattered along the stone path. And in that quiet, she whispered, "We did it, Mom. We kept the promise." The sun dipped below the skyline, bathing the garden in gold, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, Maria thought she saw two figures standing near the oak, her mother. Her grandmother, smiling. That night, Maria wrote in her journal, "Grace is not weakness. It is the strength to fight without hate, to win without pride, and to protect beauty in a world that forgets it matters." Years passed, and the Garden of Grace became more than a local landmark. It became a pilgrimage. Pilgrims of all kinds came. The broken-hearted, the ambitious, the lonely, the proud, all came seeking something, and all left changed. Children laughed under the oak's shade. Old men told stories on the bench where Grace once sat, and on the gate, sunlit and simple, still hung the engraved words, "Be kind, even when the world isn't watching." 2 weeks later, the world knew Maria Alvarez's name. News outlets praised her humility. Magazines called her the woman who refused fortune. Universities reached out to offer honorary awards, and journalists flooded her quiet neighborhood hoping for an interview. But Maria didn't chase the attention. She stayed where she always had, in her small home, baking bread for the neighbors, living simply. One morning, Daniel arrived at her door with a smile she hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Mom," he said, holding up his phone, "Hartley Holdings is making a public statement today. They're going to honor you at their annual shareholders meeting." Maria looked up from her dough. "Honor me?" she said with gentle disbelief. "They don't need to do that," Daniel grinned. "I think they need to, Mom. For themselves." That afternoon, the Hartley's grand conference hall was filled with cameras, executives, and investors. The family stood on stage. Richard, Evelyn, Lily, and Daniel. Mrs. Hartley stepped up to the microphone, her voice trembling slightly. "Before we begin today's proceedings, I want to speak about someone who changed our lives, and this company, forever." The crowd hushed. She looked out into the audience where Maria sat quietly in the second row, wearing her same soft floral dress. 20 years ago, Mrs. Hartley continued, this company was days away from bankruptcy. We were desperate, proud, and blind. And then, a woman we barely knew stepped in. She saved us. She refused credit. And she vanished. That woman is Maria Alvarez. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Maria looked slightly overwhelmed, but she smiled graciously. Mrs. Hartley's voice softened. "I misjudged her once. I saw only what I wanted to see, not who she truly was. And that mistake taught me the hardest lesson of my life." She turned toward Maria, her eyes glistening. "Humility isn't weakness. Simplicity isn't poverty. And kindness is not naivety." The audience rose to their feet. Mr. Hartley approached the podium, holding a framed plaque. "Maria, this company owes you its survival. We can't repay what you gave us, but we can finally give you your rightful place in our history." Maria walked up slowly, the crowd parting around her. She accepted the plaque with a quiet nod. "Thank you," she said into the microphone, her voice calm and steady. "But I didn't come here for recognition. I came because I wanted to see people remember that doing the right thing is worth more than being remembered for it." A hush fell over the hall. She looked around, her gaze landing on Daniel, on Lily, and finally on Mrs. Hartley. "We all build something in life," she said softly. "Some build companies, some build families, some build trust. But the ones that last are built with love." For a moment, no one moved. Then the applause rose again, stronger this time, deeper. Not the applause for a hero, but for a truth they had all felt. After the ceremony, Mrs. Hartley approached Maria quietly. "I don't deserve your kindness," she said. Maria smiled gently. "No one ever does. That's why it's kindness." Mrs. Hartley's eyes filled with tears. "You've changed me, Maria, truly." Maria reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. Then that's the only reward I need. Outside, the sunset spilled gold across the sky. The crowd slowly dispersed, reporters still murmuring her name. But Maria didn't stay. She walked home with Daniel, hand in hand, through the soft evening light. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice quiet but full of awe. "I'm so proud of you," Maria chuckled softly. "Oh, Daniel, you're the only reward I ever wanted," he smiled. "Still, the world finally knows who you are." Maria shook her head gently. "No, my son. They know what I did, who I am. That's something only you and Lily see when we sit around a table and share a meal." They passed a bakery window, its warm glow lighting their faces. Maria paused to look inside, a young woman kneading dough with the same focus Maria once had. She smiled. "See?" she said softly. "The world keeps moving. All that matters is what we leave behind." As they walked away, the city lights shimmered like quiet applause. Mrs. Hartley watched from afar, standing by her car, humbled but lighter than she'd been in years. For the first time in her life, she didn't see class or status. She saw character, and she finally understood what true wealth looked like. Because real riches aren't measured in what you own, but in the dignity you never lose, and the kindness you never stop giving. Months passed. The story of Maria Alvarez became something of a quiet legend in the city, retold in interviews, whispered in classrooms, even printed in business journals as the parable of the modest investor. But to Maria, it was just a chapter she hoped people would learn from and move on. Her days returned to calm routines. Early mornings watering her tiny garden, baking warm bread for the local orphanage, helping the elderly neighbor with her medicine. She had lived through storms, revelations, and recognition, and all she wanted now was peace. But one winter afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up to her small house. Out stepped Mrs. Hartley, not in her usual pearls and designer coat, but in a simple wool dress, her hair tied back, her expression humble. Maria opened the door with a kind smile. "Mrs. Hartley, this is a surprise." The woman nodded, clutching her gloves. "May I come in?" "Of course." They sat together at the kitchen table, the smell of cinnamon filling the air. Maria poured 2 cups of tea, the same way she did for every guest. For a long moment, they didn't speak. Then Mrs. Hartley looked around the modest kitchen, the worn table, the framed photos of Daniel and Lily, the faded lace curtains, and said softly, "It's beautiful here." Maria smiled. "It's enough." Mrs. Hartley looked down, her voice trembling. "I came because I needed to tell you something. After that ceremony, I thought I understood humility. But I didn't, not really." Maria tilted her head gently. "Go on." Mrs. Hartley took a deep breath. "I've spent my life believing success meant control. That money meant security. But watching you, the way you live, the way you give without expecting, I realized how empty my life had been. I envied you, Maria, not your wealth, your peace." Maria looked at her quietly. "Peace doesn't come from what you own, Evelyn. It comes from what you let go of." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "I don't know how to start letting go." Maria reached across the table and took her hand. "Then start small. Forgive yourself. Forgive the things you said out of pride. Be kind when you don't have to be. That's where it begins." For the first time, Mrs. Hartley smiled without the stiffness of a practiced socialite. It was soft, human. "You sound like my mother," she said. "I sound like someone who's made the same mistakes," Maria replied. They sat together for hours, sipping tea and talking about life, about their children, their fears, their regrets. 2 women who once stood on opposite sides of status now spoke as equals, bound by shared lessons and quiet understanding. As the sun set, Mrs. Hartley stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "Maria, I want to start a foundation in your name, one that helps women who were overlooked, like you once were." Maria smiled gently. "If you do, don't name it after me. Call it Grace. That's what saved both of us." Mrs. Hartley nodded slowly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Grace it is." They embraced, not as benefactor and symbol, but as friends. When the door closed behind her, Maria stood in silence, her heart full. She looked out the window, where snow had begun to fall, blanketing the world in white. Daniel came in a few minutes later, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "Mom, what did she want?" Maria smiled faintly. "To make peace. And maybe to learn how to live." He kissed her forehead. "You've changed so many lives, Mom." She chuckled softly. "Oh no, Daniel. I just reminded them what kindness looks like. The world does the rest." Outside, Mrs. Hartley's car drove away slowly into the night. But something in her posture had changed. She didn't look like the powerful matriarch of a corporate dynasty. She looked free, and Maria watched her go, whispering softly to herself. Perhaps that's the greatest gift we can give anyone. Not money, not success, but peace. The snow kept falling, quiet and forgiving, as if the heavens themselves were writing a final blessing over their story. Spring came early that year. The frost melted from the garden walls, and tiny green shoots began to push through the soil, fragile but determined. Maria knelt beside them every morning, whispering little blessings as she worked the earth with her bare hands. It had been months since Mrs. Hartley's visit, and the Grace Foundation was already making quiet ripples. Maria had refused any position or spotlight, but every week, she received handwritten letters, stories from single mothers who had found jobs, students who could now pay tuition, and widows who could rebuild their lives. She read each letter slowly, with misty eyes, storing them in a box beside her old family photos. But today there was a new envelope, gold-edged, elegant. It was from Lily. Maria smiled, opening it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mom, I wanted you to know something before anyone else hears it. I'm pregnant. I hope our baby inherits your heart, not my family's name. Love, Lily." Maria pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes welling. "A grandchild?" she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. When Daniel came home that evening, she showed him the letter. He froze for a second, then laughed, spinning her around like a boy again. "Mom, you're going to be a grandmother." The house filled with laughter, and for the first time in a long while, it felt alive, truly alive. But joy has a way of inviting memories, and as Maria sat later that night by the fireplace, the next morning, the Hartley mansion buzzed with tension. Mrs. Hartley sat in her study, phone pressed tightly against her ear, eyes wide in disbelief. "You must be mistaken," she said sharply. "Maria, what was her last name again?" The voice on the other end hesitated. "Maria Alvarez, ma'am. She was one of the most trusted analysts during our merger crisis 20 years ago. If not for her restructuring plan, Hartley Holdings would have gone bankrupt." Mrs. Hartley's hand trembled. She set the phone down slowly, her pulse racing. Maria Alvarez. She remembered that name, though back then, it belonged to a quiet woman who never attended board parties, never took credit, and disappeared after saving the company. And that same woman had just sat in her dining room, wearing a faded floral dress. Mrs. Hartley felt heat rise to her face. She replayed every word she'd said the night before, every condescending comment, every smug smile. How could she have been so blind? "Mother?" Lily appeared at the door, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Are you okay?" Mrs. Hartley straightened quickly, forcing a smile. "Of course, darling." "Why wouldn't I be?" Lily tilted her head. "You look pale. Did something happen?" No, she said, waving it off. "Just a little surprise." But when Lily left, her mask slipped again. Maria Alvarez. The name echoed in her mind like a secret she wasn't supposed to know. That afternoon, Mrs. Hartley made another call, this time to her old associate, Mr. Keller. "Do you still have the old company archives?" she asked briskly. "Yes, of course," he replied. "Why?" "I need files on Maria Alvarez. Everything you have." By the evening, a thick envelope arrived. Mrs. Hartley opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were reports, memos, and faded photographs, one of them showing a young woman standing beside a group of executives. There she was, Maria, same calm eyes, same gentle smile. Mrs. Hartley's throat tightened as she read the memo stapled to the front. Project Recovery 2003. Lead consultant, Maria Alvarez. Credit for fiscal rescue and portfolio restructuring strategy. She sank back in her chair, eyes wide. The bakery worker she had looked down on wasn't just someone with a past. She was the reason the Hartleys still had a company to their name. And worse, Maria had never taken her share of the profits. The next day, during brunch, Daniel stopped by his parents' house with Maria again. Lily was there, cheerful and warm, still unaware of the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. Mrs. Hartley greeted them with a stiff smile. "Maria, dear, I hope you don't mind joining us again," Maria smiled politely. "Of course not. Thank you for having me." They sat at the table, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Mrs. Hartley could barely meet Maria's eyes. Daniel looked between them, puzzled. "Mom, you're awfully quiet. Everything okay?" "Oh, I'm fine," she said too quickly. "Just reflecting." Maria poured herself some tea, unbothered. "Reflection is good. It helps us see things more clearly." Mrs. Hartley flinched slightly at the words. Lily, trying to ease the silence, said, "Maria, Mom was telling me about your time overseas. That must have been amazing. What was it like?" Maria looked thoughtful. "Busy, challenging. I worked with many people, some kind, some ambitious, some lost in pride." The words hung in the air like a quiet arrow. Mrs. Hartley's fingers tightened around her fork. Daniel frowned. "Mom, what's going on?" Mrs. Hartley exhaled, setting her napkin down. "Maria, I owe you an apology." Daniel blinked. "What?" Maria looked at her, calm as ever. "An apology? For what, dear?" Mrs. Hartley swallowed hard. "For underestimating you. I made assumptions about who you were, and I was wrong. Deeply wrong." The table fell silent. Even the clock seemed to pause. Maria tilted her head slightly. "You found out, didn't you?" Mrs. Hartley nodded slowly. "I did. You're that Maria Alvarez, the one who saved our company." Daniel froze. "Wait, what?" Maria gave a small, almost shy smile. "That was a long time ago. I didn't think it mattered anymore." Mr. Hartley entered the room just then, holding a newspaper. He stopped mid-step as he heard the words. "What did you say?" Mrs. Hartley turned to him. "She's the reason we're still here, Richard. She's the one from Project Recovery." Mr. Hartley's face went pale. He looked at Maria as if seeing her for the first time. "That can't be." "That project," Maria nodded. "Yes, I wrote the recovery plan you approved. I was happy to help. Then I left. I wanted to raise my son." Daniel stared at her, speechless. "Mom, you never told me this." Maria smiled gently. "You never asked, sweetheart." The room was heavy with shock. For once, Mrs. Hartley was the one who didn't know what to say. Maria reached into her purse, pulled out a thin, folded document, and placed it on the table. "I kept this only for memory's sake," she said softly. "It's a copy of the profit-sharing agreement I declined. Your company owed me shares, but I asked them to reallocate them to staff bonuses. I thought that was fair." Mrs. Hartley's eyes widened again. "You gave away your shares?" Maria nodded. "Money is replaceable. Dignity isn't." The words struck everyone at once. For the first time, Mrs. Hartley looked truly humbled. "Maria, I don't know what to say." Maria smiled warmly. "Then say nothing. Sometimes silence is apology enough." Lily reached across the table and took Maria's hand. "I'm so sorry for how my family treated you." Maria squeezed her hand gently. "You're not your family's mistakes, dear. Remember that." Daniel looked at his mother with tears in his eyes. Not from sadness, but pride. He finally saw her for who she truly was. Mrs. Hartley took a deep breath. "Maria, please, allow me to make it right." Maria shook her head softly. "There's nothing to fix. I didn't come here to prove anything. I only came to see my son happy." But as she said that, her eyes, calm and wise, met Mrs. Hartley's once more. And this time, Mrs. Hartley looked away first. The power had shifted. The poor mother wasn't poor at all. She had simply chosen humility over pride, and that was something the Hartleys could never buy. And yet, this wasn't the end, because the next day, a story about Maria Alvarez, the woman who saved Hartley Holdings, would resurface in the media, and the world would learn what kind of woman the Hartleys had truly dismissed. The following morning, everything changed. The headline spread like wildfire across business circles: "The Forgotten Woman Who Saved Hartley Holdings." It featured an old photo of Maria, standing in a modest gray suit beside a younger Richard Hartley. The article praised her strategy that saved the company from collapse, and criticized how her name had been erased from its history. Within hours, the Hartley mansion became a storm of ringing phones, buzzing messages, and whispers behind closed doors. Mrs. Hartley sat frozen on the couch, the newspaper trembling in her hands. Her friends were calling one after another, not to gossip about Maria, but to praise her. Apparently, Maria had become an overnight symbol of integrity. "How incredible," one friend said over the phone. "She refused her shares. Imagine that kind of selflessness these days." Mrs. Hartley forced a smile, her voice thin. "Yes, imagine that." When she hung up, she pressed her palms together, shaking her head. "How did I not see it?" she whispered. Mr. Hartley, pacing the room, muttered under his breath. "We treated her like some charity case, and she's the reason we even have this house." The doorbell rang. Lily hurried to answer, and froze. It was Maria. She stood there quietly, her posture calm, wearing the same faded floral dress as before. But somehow she didn't look small anymore. She looked complete. "Good morning," she said softly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Mrs. Hartley rose quickly, her expression a mix of guilt and awe. "Maria, please come in." Maria stepped inside, her eyes wandering over the now familiar grandeur of the place. "I thought I should visit before things get noisy," she said with a small smile. "The press has already started calling me." Mrs. Hartley's face flushed. "We never meant to—" Maria raised a gentle hand. "You don't need to explain. I understand how people see what they want to see." Lily stepped forward, her eyes filled with emotion. "Maria, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any of that." Maria touched her shoulder kindly. "You have a good heart, dear. That's all that matters." Daniel appeared next, holding a newspaper in one hand, his expression full of pride. "Mom, everyone's talking about you. They're saying you're a legend." Maria laughed softly. "A legend? Oh, Daniel, I'm just a woman who did her job." But Mrs. Hartley shook her head. "No, you were more than that. You were the foundation." For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick with something new. Respect. Then Maria's tone softened. "I came here not to talk about the past, but about the future. Daniel and Lily deserve peace. Let's give them that." Mrs. Hartley nodded quickly, tears brimming. "You have my word," but Maria wasn't done. She looked around the lavish room, her eyes full of quiet wisdom. "I learned something long ago," she said softly. "Wealth can buy walls, but not warmth. Power can buy fear, but not respect. You built an empire, Mrs. Hartley. But sometimes the greatest empire is the one inside your heart." Mrs. Hartley's lip trembled. "You're right. I've spent so long trying to look important. I forgot what being kind meant." Maria smiled. "It's never too late to remember." For the first time, Mrs. Hartley reached out and took Maria's hands. "I judged you unfairly. Please forgive me." Maria's eyes softened. "I already have." Outside, the cameras had begun to gather. Reporters wanted to speak with the woman who turned down millions. Daniel stepped closer, concern in his voice. "Mom, are you sure you want to talk to them?" Maria smiled faintly. What if the woman everyone mocked for being poor was the one holding the key to their future? That's exactly what happened the day Maria first met her daughter-in-law's family. It was a bright Saturday morning, but Maria's heart was heavy. Her son, Daniel, had begged her to act simple when meeting his fiancé's parents, the wealthy Hartleys. He said they were proud people, traditional, and that she shouldn't embarrass him. So Maria wore her oldest floral dress, one that had faded from years of washing. She pulled her hair into a neat bun, carried her cracked leather purse, and took the bus instead of a taxi. When she stepped into the Hartleys' grand home, it felt like walking into another world. Marble floors gleamed under the sunlight, A chandelier sparkled overhead, and portraits of ancestors stared down from the walls like silent judges. Mrs. Hartley, tall and elegant, gave her a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you must be Maria," she said in a tone that made the word must sound like a chore. "Please sit down," Maria smiled softly. "Thank you, ma'am." She sat carefully on the edge of the white sofa, afraid even her breath might stain it. Across the room, Daniel avoided her gaze. His fiancée Lily looked nervous but said nothing. "Daniel tells us you live modestly," Mr. Hartley began, swirling his coffee as though he were discussing the weather. "That must have been quite the struggle, raising a boy alone." Maria nodded, her voice gentle. "Yes, sir. But struggle teaches you to appreciate what little you have." Mrs. Hartley exchanged a glance with her husband, the kind that said how quaint. "Well," she said, folding her manicured hands, "Lily's life has been very different. We've given her the best of everything. We hope Daniel can provide the same." Maria smiled again. "He's a good boy. I'm sure he'll take care of her." Mrs. Hartley's lips twitched. "We'll see." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of a gold clock on the mantelpiece. Maria felt her throat tighten but kept her composure. She had faced harder rooms than this. Still, something deep in her heart ached. She wasn't ashamed of being poor. But watching her son shrink under the Hartley's gaze made her chest sting. Mrs. Hartley leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Tell me, Maria, what do you do for a living?" Maria hesitated. "I help in a small bakery nearby." "Oh," Mrs. Hartley said, her voice sweet as vinegar. "How lovely." The words hung in the air, dripping with polite cruelty. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom makes great bread, actually. Everyone in the neighborhood loves—" Mrs. Hartley cut him off with a smile that could slice glass. "That's wonderful, dear. But of course our family's business operates on a rather different scale." Maria nodded politely. "Of course." But inside, she felt a flicker, not of anger, not yet, but of something deeper. A quiet knowing. If only they knew who she really was. The maid entered with tea, setting down delicate china cups worth more than Maria's entire wardrobe. Mrs. Hartley lifted hers gracefully. "Sugar?" she asked, then added with a faint smirk. "Oh, I suppose you might prefer it plain." Maria smiled again, calm as ever. "I'll take it plain, thank you." Lily shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, please," but Mrs. Hartley waved her off. "We're just talking, dear." Maria sipped her tea in silence, her eyes wandering across the grand room, the paintings, the polished silver, the bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes. She recognized one of the books. In fact, she had written an essay for it years ago under a different name, back when she worked in finance, before she gave everything up for Daniel's education. But that, they didn't need to know. Not yet. Mrs. Hartley's voice broke her thoughts. "So, Maria, I imagine you must be very proud. Your son is marrying into a good family." Maria smiled gently. "I'm proud because he found love, not money." That answer earned her a sharp glance. Mr. Hartley chuckled softly. "Such idealism. You don't hear much of that these days." The clock ticked louder. Lily looked between them, anxious. "Maybe we should talk about the wedding menu instead." But no one listened. Mrs. Hartley leaned back. "Tell me, Maria, what kind of gift were you planning to bring for the engagement?" Maria blinked. "A small one, handmade." "Handmade?" Mrs. Hartley repeated, raising an eyebrow. "How charming." Daniel's shoulders slumped. Maria saw the shame in his eyes, and her heart broke a little more. But she didn't flinch. She only smiled softly, almost kindly. "Well," she said, placing her cup down, "sometimes the smallest gifts hold the biggest meaning." The room fell silent again. No one knew that in her purse, that old, cracked leather purse. Maria carried something that would soon turn this entire conversation upside down. Something that would make even Mrs. Hartley forget how to breathe. But that would come later. The following weekend, Maria received an invitation, or rather, a summons. Mrs. Hartley had called Daniel, insisting that Maria join them for a proper family dinner before the engagement was officially announced. Daniel's voice over the phone was tense. "Mom, please, just be careful what you say this time. They're sensitive about appearances." Maria smiled through the receiver. "I understand, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." But after hanging up, she stood by the window for a long time, staring at the city lights. Her reflection in the glass looked older than she remembered. Years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, second jobs, missed birthdays, had etched quiet strength into her face. And yet, in her son's world, that strength looked like weakness. When the night came, Maria took the same bus again, clutching the same worn purse. But this time, something else sat inside, something she hadn't planned to show. The Hartleys' house was brighter than ever. Expensive cars lined the driveway. Voices echoed from the hall. Laughter, clinking glasses, the polished sound of wealth. As Maria stepped inside, all conversation paused for a heartbeat. Mrs. Hartley's eyes swept her from head to toe. "Oh, you came," she said, feigning surprise. "We weren't sure if you'd be comfortable joining such a formal event." Maria smiled. "Family is family, ma'am. I wouldn't miss it." Mr. Hartley approached, his cufflinks catching the light. "Do make yourself at home, Maria. Lily's uncle is here. He's a senior executive at Hartley Holdings. Perhaps you've heard of it." "I think I've read about it," Maria said softly, her tone unreadable. Mrs. Hartley looped her arm through her husband's. "We thought it might be good for Daniel to learn more about our family business. After all, it's quite different from running a bakery, isn't it?" A few guests nearby chuckled politely. Maria nodded, still calm. Quite different indeed. Dinner was served soon after. Crystal glasses, silver utensils, plates that looked too perfect to touch. Maria took her seat quietly, next to Lily, who gave her a nervous smile. Across the table, the Hartleys entertained guests with stories of luxury vacations, business expansions, and social events. Every sentence sparkled with the need to impress. Maria listened in silence, her expression patient and serene. At one point, Mrs. Hartley turned to her. "So, Maria," she said sweetly, "we were just discussing investments. Tell me, how do you manage your finances?" Daniel nearly choked on his drink. "Mom," but Maria placed a hand on his arm. Her eyes met Mrs. Hartley's. "Oh, I don't have much to manage these days. I just keep a few accounts here and there, mostly old ones." "Old ones?" Mrs. Hartley's curiosity sharpened. "Where, if you don't mind me asking?" Maria sipped her water. "Oh, just some small holdings I left running overseas when I stopped working." The room went still for a moment. Lily blinked. "Wait, you used to work overseas?" Maria smiled gently. "A long time ago. I was in corporate finance before Daniel was born." The air changed, subtly, but unmistakably. Mrs. Hartley forced a laugh. "How interesting. I didn't realize you had that kind of background." "Oh, it's nothing," Maria said humbly. "Just a few years managing investments for a few companies. One of them might have even been Hartley Holdings, if I recall correctly." Every head turned. Mr. Hartley blinked. "Excuse me?" Maria's eyes twinkled. "Yes. I handled some of your firm's early portfolio expansion projects back when it was still family-run. You were just starting out, weren't you?" The color drained slightly from Mr. Hartley's face. "That was decades ago," Maria smiled kindly. "Yes, time flies, doesn't it?" A tense silence followed, broken only by the faint clinking of cutlery. No one seemed to know what to say. Mrs. Hartley quickly recovered her composure. "Well, that's quite impressive, but of course times have changed. We're on a much larger scale now." Maria nodded. "I can see that." Her tone was calm, but something about it made Mrs. Hartley frown. Halfway through dinner, Mrs. Hartley leaned toward her husband, whispering something Maria couldn't quite hear. But she saw the flicker of unease in their eyes. Lily glanced between them, confused. "Mom, Dad, is everything okay?" "Oh, yes, dear," Mrs. Hartley said quickly. "We were just surprised to learn how accomplished your future mother-in-law is." Maria smiled softly. "You shouldn't be." "We all come from somewhere," Mrs. Hartley forced another smile, but this time, her confidence was cracking, and Maria knew it. As dessert was served, Mrs. Hartley tried to regain her control of the evening. So, Maria, I suppose all that's behind you now. You must enjoy your quiet, simple life. Maria looked at her for a long moment. I do, she said, but sometimes quiet doesn't mean simple. The line hung in the air like a riddle. Lily stared at her future mother-in-law, sensing there was more to Maria's story, something powerful, something hidden beneath her gentle tone. And she was right.